Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our webinar series, Embracing Change. This week, we have a dear friend and an extremely wise human being, even though he looks very young. I don't know, a little bit of gray hair on the side, so maybe showing some proof of wisdom. Ahmed Husain, thank you, Ahmed, for being here today. I know it's your lunchtime in London, so I hope we won't keep you too long before your lunch. And today the topic is lessons learned, and we're going to go step by step. We have a good hour to share. I know that we could go on for hours and hours as we do when we chat and catch up. But we'll talk about your days, as you said, on Wall Street, and some sharing on serving the large European family offices that you serve, and then how slowly but surely you're living in a state of flow. So Ahmed, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining us, and those of you who will be watching later at your own convenience. Thank you.
Thanks, Faisal. Thank you for having me. Obviously, we've been friends for a while, read your book a couple of times, listened to all the other webinars that you guys have done, and have learned a bunch. So I think we had a bunch to cover. So I guess let's start from the top, and I'll sort of give the context of, I think, how you and I met and why we're probably talking. You know, I was born a long time ago in Pakistan and kind of came from an emerging market country. So a lot of my view of the world is coming from a poor, lower middle class family out of Pakistan, discovering America, surviving there, getting married, getting divorced, making money, losing money, and just working on Wall Street for about 20 years. So I've kind of been on the journey, as we all go as we get older, of self-discovery. And so you can kind of go through that. But let's jump on to, you know, what I've learned being around some of these interesting people. And ever since I was a child, I've been interested in money. I don't know why, but, you know, ever since I was 3 years old, it was about money. And I remember, you know, any gifts, whenever it was a birthday or Eid or anything like that, people would ask, what would you want? And I said, just give me money. And I would save it up and I wouldn't spend it. So I've been a frugal miser my whole life, and just kind of putting it away for I don't know what. And I think and that's probably what got me attracted to finance and Wall Street. And so I ended up there in New York in 1999 and did a lot of different things. Worked at firms like Lehman Brothers and Goldman Sachs, and then moved to London, worked with a large billionaire called Patrick Drahi, ran his family office, and have been around the European family office crowd for about 10 years. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. But, you know, thinking about your audience and some of the other amazing speakers you have had on, I sort of thought to myself, okay, what is the real value that I can bring your audience in terms of what I've learned from these people that maybe is useful and applicable, because not everything that rich people do is something that we should copy. There are certain habits that we should ignore. So what did I learn from them, right? And so that's sort of the lesson to bear. And I think a lot of us also want to be rich one day. And so I think the first lesson I learned from them was that to be a billionaire, you actually don't need to be very financially sophisticated. Most billionaires I meet are actually not financially sophisticated. They're good at doing one or two very specific things. They're the best in the world at that. And they sort of leave the rest of it to other people. And I also learned that there's many ways to make money. I think we always think, you know, there's very specific ways to make money, but money can be made in many different ways. And so you see the diversity that these guys excel at, which always impressed me. So I think the first thing I always tell people is like, look, you don't need to be good at stocks and bonds. You don't need to be good at trading or anything like that. Just figure out something that you're really good at, and then we can figure out how to monetize that later. I think the other thing that makes these guys super amazing is that they are focused on an outcome. They know what they want, right? And so I see a lot of people, and I used to be like this too, kind of like living day to day, but no real direction, no real flow, no real sort of knowing what their purpose was or where they were going. I think a lot of these billionaires and you know, a lot of successful people, whether they make money or not, a lot of successful people know kind of what they want in life. And I think some of the webinars you've done kind of, and I think Jonathan Cave especially, kind of thinking about, you know, what is your special talent? What are your values? I think understanding those early then helps you know what you should focus on and what you should do. And I think what makes a lot of these people successful is they figure that out quite early on. And so they have a long runway of 20, 40, 50, 60 years to work on that thing that they consider is a problem that they want to solve or an outcome that they want to achieve, why they're here. And I think once you sort of know the kind of things that Jonathan's talked about, you know, your core values, your talents, then it also makes decisions easier. So many of us make bad decisions, uncertain decisions, decisions that we then reverse later, and that's a waste of time. But I think if you know a lot of those sort of things about yourself, so I guess the big lesson is sort of self-knowledge, spending a lot of time knowing yourself. I think that's, whether you want to get rich or not, I think just to be happy, it's good to have self-knowledge and spend time with yourself. The other thing that was a little bit new to me was just thinking in terms of, you know, how much they are into not technology, but change. If you look at all the fortunes that have been made historically, they've all been because there was some change happening or some technology being applied. Even if you go to somebody like John Rockefeller, he figured out that there was technology, how to get oil out of the ground quickly, and then, hey, you needed to transport it, so you needed to have the technology to load it onto the trains quickly, and then how to make sure your trains could go anywhere. And so all of these guys figured out some technology well. IKEA figured out how to manufacture furniture, but not actually make it, but make it very cheaply, put it in a box so somebody else could figure it out, and that would be easy for other people to figure out. And so IKEA proliferated. So I think if you look at any of these billionaires, they sort of figured out change or innovation well, and then they figured out what they wanted to try and experiments that they wanted to run, and they kind of leaned into uncertainty as opposed to taking the path that is, hey, that's the way it's always been done, so do that. So I'd say those are the first three things that came to mind. Kind of just figure out, there are many ways to make money, figure out what you really want in terms of outcome from your life, and then three, lean into change and find where change is happening. In fact, if you want big things to happen in your life, you probably want an area where a lot of change is occurring. Those were the main things. And then I think, you know, there's some techniques that these guys use. A word that gets bandied around a lot with billionaires is this idea of leverage. And people always think, well, it's financial leverage. But leverage is more than that. I mean, financial leverage is good as long as it doesn't blow you up. But successful people use leverage in a lot of ways. I mean, look at you right now, right? You're using technology as a point of leverage. You have a message, you want to help clients, but with COVID, with things shut down, you could just say, hey, we're kind of just going to wait until things are better, but you're using technology to build a brand. You probably have a bigger brand now than you did a year ago. You're using Zoom webinars to get people who you couldn't get physically because they might be in Montana or wherever part of the world, but they're on and available for you. So I think they use leverage, whether it's technology, people in terms of having a network, capital, a brand, or they go get new knowledge and they figure out how to leverage all of these things to create something bigger. And so they look for asymmetry where they could have much more upside. And I think, you know, to what you've done with Geneticare, to do what you've done, build the first family health office, well, that's pretty uncharted territory, right? It's not like you're copying anybody else because heck, no one's actually done that before. So you've kind of leaned into uncertainty, kind of gathered all of these smart people together to create something that didn't exist before. And now you have a unique offering. You're not going to be competing with anybody else on it. You either love it or you don't love it, but it's not a question of, well, you're a lot like this other product I saw. You're like nothing else. So I think they create this unique product idea solution using all of these points of leverage that I mentioned. And then I think, you know, they think bigger. I think it's a level of ambition, whether you take a Bezos or Zuckerberg or IKEA or Dyson, it's a level of ambition that I want millions or billions of people using my product. And that comes from self-confidence, and it comes from some of the things we talked about at the beginning, just kind of really knowing yourself. It takes courage and it takes self-certainty to dream that bigger dream, to to be out there doing uncertain things, which again, I'd love to hear from you on how you figured out and did that. And I think the corollary of that, because when you're focusing on doing something big, they're also very good at saying no to everything. And so one principle that I try to keep in mind is the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 concept, which is basically 20% of things you do on a daily basis, on a weekly, annual basis, are going to give you 80% of your outcomes. So you should figure out very quickly what you think those 20% of things are, because all people and all things are not equal in terms of their outcome and the value in your life. So you should figure out those key 20% and then really spend time on that, double down on that. And then the other 80%, well, if you could get rid of some of that, even better. If you could outsource some of that, even better. But definitely don't sweat that stuff. In fact, actually, to be in flow, don't sweat anything, because it's all small stuff in the end. So I'd say just getting the Pareto principle down right has made a big difference. And, big hedge funds like 3G and private equity firms have then turned this into a concept called zero-based budgeting, which is just, when you start the day, assume your calendar is empty, assume you have no obligations, assume you don't need to do anything. What is the thing you should prioritize today? What are the key things that you should be doing to drive your life forward? Makes a big difference, rather than, I think one of the problems that rich people suffer from is being rich creates all sorts of other burdens on your life. Whether, the accountant calling you, the tax guy calling you, the guy who's got your fund structure, there's a lot of demands on you. And so before you know it, the thing that made you great because you had all this time to think and do and act, all of that goes away because you get buried under this pile of stuff that's actually not that interesting to you. So I think the people who can get rich and get successful, but still stay happy, are the ones that can figure out how to create space in their life and figure out how to say no to a lot of things and figure out what is really important to what they want to do. And then another thing I think that you've talked about, and I think you've shown with these webinar series, is, just not compromising on the people you spend time with. It is so important. It's an old saying, but you are basically a sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and that is so true. So we have to make sure we don't compromise on the people we spend our time with and the people we engage with. And so always be figuring out, how can I surround myself and seek the best people out there? And that's another thing a lot of these successful European billionaires have in common. They're always figuring out who's doing something amazing, who's the best of that game, and go seek those people out. And then I think once you go seek those people out, some of us might say, well, I'm not a billionaire, so what can I do with that? And I think the other part, the corollary to that for people like us who might not be billionaires yet, is that figure out how to add value to others. If you can go really far in life by adding value to other people and figuring out, and I was on a call with Deepak Chopra on Monday, and one of the things that he was talking about was how to be happy, or how to live a better life is, rather than asking how I can be happy, ask how can I make other people happy. Rather than asking how can I be successful, is ask how can I make other people successful. And so that can create this energy around you that has the best people seek you out. You don't actually have to go out and seek other people if you just sort of on a day-to-day basis figure out. And I spend a lot of time doing this. I go through my list of contacts and who I know, and I want to ask myself, how can I add value to that person today? What can I share with them? Who can I connect them with? And so I think that's a helpful thing that I've learned being around people like that. So look, I'll sort of stop there. I did a monologue for about 10 minutes on what I've learned, but.
No, great. Thank you very much for, it's a large width and breadth of sharing that you just had. Let's just take a look at one question and then we can. So one of the few things I read consistently is your weekly few things, right? The one you keep sending. Great stuff you are sharing, and thank you. How do you manage to do it? You're right now obviously in the midst of serving hundreds of family offices in Europe, but at the same time you have, the time, you make the time and you choose to continuously share a few things, which is your weekly sharing, or, sometimes it's more frequent than that. So how do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first, again, to go back to first principles, as Simon Sinek would say, why? Why do we do what we do? And so the way I sort of think about how I solve for my life is be around interesting people, learn interesting things. And if you want to do that, then you got to figure out, okay, what makes me learn new things? And what I learned was you can learn a lot more you can understand a lot more and you can retain a lot more if you actually curate all the information that's going in and then you teach those ideas to other people, so the idea kind of uh, settles in your mind. So a couple of, maybe 2 years ago, I started writing an email to 2 or 3 friends saying, hey, I read this book this month, this is what it was about, this is what I learned, these are my thoughts, kind of almost like a book review. And then these 3 or 4 friends would reply back and say, I read a better book, or this is what I thought. And slowly that's kind of gone up to maybe 1,000 or so people. And now it's weekly and I share. Again, it's just a way to keep myself at risk because I would come home with hundreds of pages of reading or books, but then I would look at myself at the end of the week and be like, what did I actually learn? So the act of writing it and then sharing it with other people and then knowing that you need to send this out every Thursday keeps you at risk. So I encourage everybody to sort of, even if they don't share it with anyone, to just write down what they're learning. And it's I guess you could call it a public journal, right? It's my public reading journal. I will share it with anyone who wants to read it, just to make sure that I'm being transparent with my learning, because I think other people have a lot to give me. That's why I share it. And then I think also knowing that, and I think you shared this in your book, just we're all in sort of the same journey, right? We're all like passengers on this planet. We're all learning, we're all growing. None of us is born perfect. So just realizing that whatever I'm going through is probably what you're going through. So why don't we just be open and vulnerable and share some of that with other people, to let them know and learn from their experience, and then just be more open rather than these fake superficial conversations that are easy to have in finance, especially. So I wanted to get beyond that. And so that's the reason.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that, to also let people know that they're not alone, right? I mean, right. There's more than them, and then you can share your experience and they can maybe choose to, take some of those on. So when you say you're learning, that's one thing, right? But then to put into action. So now you've done this every Thursday, right? That's great. So obviously you register it as you share, as you reflect, as you introspect before you share. And obviously I read it every week, and a number of people on the call and that will be watching do as well. The question is, then what, right? So we talked about, you talked about Jonathan's, that's the being, which is your values. And then there's the doing, right? Aligning the talents with my core, right? It's a full alignment, right? I talk about head and heart. We talk about all elements. So what about the next step? So you send this on Thursday, and then what? Do you take action? Do you have an accountability journal? I mean, these are tips that, people will be able to learn from.
Yeah. So I think if you step back and said, okay, what do I do that helps me live a more holistic life, or things that I sort of learned from 20 years of mistakes while I work, I'd say the things that have helped, again, so Jonathan Cave's priming idea, or sort of the values, yeah, super helpful. What Anissa is talking about being present and living in possibilities, super helpful. What Dr. D's been talking about in terms of looking after your health and your immune system, this is lemon water, right? It was from his first webinar. So that simple stuff that sort of helps. And I think just, and I would say I would encapsulate all of this by saying, just accepting and being humble that, hey, I might be 43 years old. I don't know anything. And there's so many people on the planet that I can learn from. So just living in possibility and living in openness to say, I just want to learn from other people. And I think maybe one thing that I was lucky on in my 30s working at Goldman was to just assume that there was at least, even in the people I didn't like, but I assumed that there was one thing in that person that I could learn from, that they had a trait or a character or a feature, something they did that I could learn from and copy. And so I would just kind of look at it as my job is if I could take the best things from hundreds of people, well, that could make me a more useful human being in my life. And so I try to just look for, I think everybody has a great feature that is their superpower. And I would like to have a lot of different people's superpower. And so I look for that all the time. And I understand that everybody has something to teach me. And that's been a useful mental habit to have going around. And I think apart from that, just this whole idea of being in flow, I have, and I had a lot of anxiety. I would stress out about all sorts of things. So I think the first time I came across it was Eckhart Tolle's work. And so I think a lot of that helped me to just stop stressing out about the past. It doesn't really matter. The future is not here. You can't be anxious about that. And just trying to be present more often. I'm not a meditation kind of guy. I just can't do it. I can't sit still. My mind is racing. So I try to go for long walks where I just, at least I'm in motion so I can shut my mind. But I'm not a meditation guy. And I try to tell people, look, if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. Don't force yourself into it. But I think things that you can do that allow you to be present just at the moment and not be thinking about anything else is important, because that's all what flow is. And then finding those things, and to what you asked earlier about writing that weekly email, when I write that, and there's a few things I do like that allow me to just, the world disappears. All there is in front of me is books and pages, and I don't know how much time has passed. And when I look at the clock, wow, 2 hours later. And so I would encourage all of us to find those things. Whatever those things are for you are probably your superpowers, are probably things that you love doing. They're probably things that you're great at. And I do this with my kids too. We kind of ask each other, hey, what's your superpower? What do you think you're better at than anybody else? And, every 2-3 years, I email my friends and I ask them, what do you think is my superpower? What do you think that I can do better than other people? Or what's easy for me that's hard for other people? And that's also a good way, because sometimes we live in our own head. We're anxious. We're not sure if we're good at all. And I think other people can be good at saying, hey, Faisal, dude, you're really good at these things. And then you end up realizing, oh, wow, I didn't know that, because we're all in our own heads. We don't really look at ourselves from the outside as other people do. So that's been helpful. And then obviously things like priming, and I learned that from, went to Tony Robbins' Unleash the Power Within, which I highly recommend everybody go to, intend to do it again. One of the things that he talks about is this whole idea of priming, just being thankful, feeling your divinity, feeling your connection, feeling love around you, and then love for other people. And then the last part, really imagining, manifesting your reality. So knowing the goals that you have and then seeing yourself achieve it. And this has been an amazing thing, and I didn't believe it because it sounded a lot like Hocus Pocus when I first did it. So I just imagined my goals, and then my goals happen. But
and then you're like,
and then you do it, and you're like, wow, this stuff actually does happen. And it feels even weird saying it, like, yeah, just thinking about your goals is more likely. But your brain and the universe itself, there's so much happening behind the scenes that we don't even see, and your unconscious is so powerful that it can be working on things in an implicit manner that you don't even see. So priming in that way that you just think about your goals and you think about them coming, and you will see all of this stuff start to happen in your life. And I don't have an explanation for it, but
it's interesting that the thing is that, it's interesting, you're doing the visualization, but when it really works is when you're not attached to it. So it's kind of a really fine line between visualizing and knowing it's happening, because obviously your brain can't tell the difference between visual and reality. And so that's how it accelerates the process, but you also should not be attached to the outcome. So for us, the exercise we do is to say, when you hear the name Ahmed, what comes to mind? What are the 3 things that come to mind? And normally those are the 3 superpowers that would come to mind. So what do your kids say when they hear that? Is it a very different answer from everybody else? They're smaller, so obviously they'll
Well,
but they're much more truthful. So
you're much more truthful. So my elder one thinks her power is to persuade daddy because she can persuade daddy of anything.
okay.
Power and influence. And I think the younger one, Amna, who's 7, thinks her superpower is courage. She's very brave.
Okay, that's amazing, mashallah. It's amazing.
Scares her. But and let's see how this grows over time, how they change over time.
let's hope. Let's hope the rest of us human beings don't knock them down to
right.
the reality check, right? Which we unfortunately have done to a lot of our children, right? Bring them back to reality and crush their dreams. Let's hope we don't do that.
Exactly. I think it's important from a young age to tell kids, look, you have a superpower. You have a gift that other people, that you will discover, that maybe other people can see. And I think it's important to have them that, because like you said, society has a habit of knocking you down, knocking you in, putting you into a square peg. You're also unique. And I think it's important for kids to realize I'm smart in my own way. I'm a genius in my own way. There's something that you're a genius about. We just don't know it yet.
Yes. Or you may not have recognized it. It's already there. It's within you, which is the reality, right? The question is, are you going to allow it to express itself, and are you going to recognize it, right? And a lot of times it's in your face, but you just don't know because you haven't spent the time like you are asking people, right? That, wait a minute. And that's the exercise, where you say, okay, what are the 3 things that come to mind? And ask, instead of emailing your friends, just say, what's the feeling? What's the thought that comes? And you'll be surprised at the words that come out. And you'll be like, whoa, that's a little different from what I heard when I asked for the superpower, right? Because
when you sit with yourself and ask yourself that question.
No, you ask somebody else. You're sitting with them and you say, okay, when you hear the word Ahmed, what are the 3 things you feel, think, or know? And just watch the words, and then you'll be able to connect them to the superpower that you asked by email. It'll be, one will be the feeling and the action, right? It's the knowing, and the other one will be the actual, the physical reality of it. So it's a different. So now, when you're seeing the family offices that you're serving, right, and they're, like you said, that they end up amassing this huge amount of wealth and then get bogged down by this, by all the demands on them. So are you seeing many of them successfully delegating by creating the family office or creating a structure, or do you see a lot of them really getting drained? What are the patterns? Because there are a number of people on the call that have formal and informal family offices that are involved, and some of them are not so involved. What are you seeing? I mean, you serve a number of them, so it'd be great to know a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the common things you see in these people is that once you have reached a certain point in your life, there's always a question of what now, and what do I do with this? And actually, this doesn't make me happy anymore, or it's either a competitiveness or it's a void because they're not sure what comes after this. And I think the ones that succeed are the ones that have almost found an infinite mountain to keep climbing. Or, as David Brooks wrote in his book, The Second Mountain, find some other bigger purpose to pursue.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of, but they have to find something bigger than themselves. And that's the way they end up being happier, or a bigger problem or solution, or the way they want to help people. But the ones that get stuck are kind of like, that just define it in terms of more material things, or
so basically they stuck on the first half, right? Bob Buford talks about halftime. There's the first half and the second half. The first half is the building half. So you're saying basically those who get stuck in the first half have a more challenging time to what I call, a meaningful. Okay, happiness to me is fleeting, but obviously people use that word, but for meaning, right? To find meaning. While those that use the second half to give back. But are you seeing that they're actually leveraging their strengths from the first half, or do you see a lot of people not realizing that?
I think most people don't realize it because they kind of think the helping thing is, hey, let's have a foundation or a trust or do some kind of philanthropy. most people are not able to merge what they did and how they made it with what they want to do. And so that generally gets broken, and or the first generation is so busy making it that by the time they hand over to the second generation is like, well, it's kind of not my money, so I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do with it. So let's just keep it safe and grow it a little bit, maybe give some charity. So it's a hard transition, and rightly so, maybe because it's not something that people are taught. It's not a discussion that is had. And so some of the things that you guys have done with Philip, I think, and some of the other speakers you've had,
Roger King,
Roger King, have discussed like how to have some of those discussions early, and like what is our purpose as a family, what's our charter, what's our 100-year, 200-year plan as a family, having some of these discussions. And I don't think you need to be a billionaire family to have that, but I think just having an ethos, I think structurally, I was talking to our common friend, Muhammad Ali, yesterday. And so one of the problems, obviously, as society is we're still thinking about tomorrow and the week after, maybe, and maybe planning the weekend, but none of us are sort of planning like 10 years, 30 years, 50 years. Like, what is the message I want to send my grandkids or my great grandkids? How do I play a longer game? And as a society, we're playing a much shorter game than we ever have, which is having its own structural issues.
Yeah, but the thing is that you're seeing more and more that the second gen is playing a lot more defense, so they're not playing much offense. Because in Asia, second gen, especially in China, a lot more. I mean, it's a very differently educated group, right? That are going into the PE, the VC, the tech space, while the first gen made a lot of money in the old, the old economy, right? Okay. And the new generation is not interested in the old economy. So are you seeing that they're playing defense because they actually realize we didn't make the money, so let's just play safe, or is it just the hunger? Isn't there?
Yeah. I think Europe is sort of unlucky in the sense of, the wars that happened 1939 to 1945 has left a kind of a scar on that last generation, where a lot of people had to start from scratch. A lot of countries and cities were destroyed. So I think that, and then some of the inflation that occurred in Germany before that, has left this kind of scar tissue that makes people a lot more risk averse. And so I think as a continent, it's much more risk averse. And if you look at, innovation and entrepreneurship, it's only now starting to be involved. And I do a lot of work in the venture capital space in Europe. And I think we're probably 5 to 10 years behind the US in the next generation thinking about it in Europe, wanting to even finance innovation. To be innovative, you need to have a whole ecosystem. It's not just about 5 or 6 people decide, hey, I'm the next gen, I want to be more innovative and think about growth. You have to have a whole culture, ecosystem, ethos. A lot of other things need to work, which the US has kind of always had because it was a protected continent, landmass. It was never attacked in any way. And that's been the culture because the immigrants that came there. Europe's been different about that. And it's great to see how China is leading the way in that format. And I don't want to make cultural comparisons, but you could say maybe Japan and China are different in that sense. Yeah. Also, you wouldn't put them in the same camp in terms of the innovation and entrepreneurship that's happening in the second or third generations in Japan. So I think in that sense, Europe's a little bit unlucky, but I think we're probably at an inflection point now for a number of reasons. Enough time has passed from some of those events, enough of those ecosystems have come together. The next gen is rising and is thinking about all of these things and is realizing if we don't innovate, what's going to be our fate.
Do you think that because the European money is older money and there's a lot more structure, right? I mean, Peter Vogel talked about family enterprise, right? Now, the thing is you can create that level of, he talked about the five health stones, touchstones. But the question is you could create that in a very agile, dynamic manner, and you can create it in a very rigid, inflexible manner. So do you think that it's the structure that's also limiting the entrepreneurship? Because you do have examples, right? You have the Müller family in France, you have other examples. Even though they're very entrepreneurial, it's still very structured. So are you seeing that the structure is limiting them? Or is it the fear that you said? Or is it just the mindset that, you know, why take the risk, right? Why, you know, go outside the boundaries, you know, and do that?
Yeah, I think, well, obviously, if you have almost too much structure, and I think they're not in flow, right? Structures were put together for legal reasons, for tax reasons, for other structure reasons to make sure the money wasn't lost. And so sometimes all of these structures can end up enslaving you and imprisoning you and stop the flexibility because you're like, actually can't do anything.
Yeah.
And so I think that's fair. And like I said, some of it's structural because this wealth is now so old. And I think it's a little bit of a different ethos too, where the economies are growing, because if Europe is growing at 1-2%, it's a different mentality versus China. Hey, we're coming off of 3 decades of 8 to 10% growth per annum. It's just like, you know, you make a mistake or two, it doesn't matter because the growth will just bail you out. But if you're barely growing and the banks aren't fully functioning, well, it's a different outcome. You can't really make mistakes in the same way anymore. And so that also gets into your ethos and culture and how you behave. So multitude of reasons. Some of those will get fixed over time. Some of those are not gonna get fixed.
Yeah. So you're still in the financial space, right? And at the same time, you're really well versed and very open to, you know, the space that we're in, and also the space of Deepak and Eckhart and all of that. How do you, are you seeing more and more people in that space becoming connected to what you're doing, or are you still an absolute outlier?
You know, I think when I was in my late 30s, I kind of had this realization that you could either be very one-dimensional and just talk about finance and numbers and just think about what product can I sell my client, or you could step back and say, I'm a human, you're a human, and we should just figure out how to be happier and do stuff and be useful to each other and play a long game. A lot of people talk about this long game, but I'm like, well, what do you mean by a long game? I mean, you know, and so I try to define my life and how I want to live it is play long-term games or do long-term things with people who are also long-term oriented. And so, and that just means that you have to be open with people, like, look, and you also have to only associate with the people who you think also want to play long-term games and be long-term in that nature. No, not everybody wants to think or be like that. But I just think for my own sanity and for my own happiness, and what I think is the right way to do it is you have to think about people more holistically and be like, I want to help this human being more holistically. And I think, you know, clients appreciate that because they know when you call, you are thinking about this whole purpose and, hey, let's go to a meditation retreat, or I went to this Tony Robbins conference, or this is the book I read, where you're treating them as human beings, not like a machine to machine interaction where I want to do this transaction with you. If you don't want to do this transaction, I will now get off the phone. I think that's not good for anybody because these financial investments or money is just an abstraction, right? What is money? Like, what is it actually going to buy you? You have millions of dollars in the bank. You're not actually solving for money, you're solving for safety, stability, happiness, joy. So let us solve for some of those things directly.
Yeah, so you're basically saying that you're treating them not as a means to an end, which is obviously the financial side, but an end in itself. So you're looking at the human being as a whole and saying, how can I serve you as you know, in all the other realms, in my capacity, of course, you know, without putting yourself at risk in terms of the legal perspective. Yeah.
Simply asking yourself, how can I be useful to you? How can I be useful to this person? And if it's financially, that's fine. If there's other ways, I'll do that. But just, but you know, again, you have to be selective on who you do that with. You can't do that with the world. You have to look for people that also are happy, genuine people who want to be in flow and do the right thing. I do recognize that not everybody in the world is good. So you just have to focus on the people with the right kind of energy and surround yourself with the right kind of energy.
So you had a call. I mean, I attended the webinar. You did the dialogue with Deepak. So, you know, in his term, the long game is digital Deepak, right? That he's launching. Have a conversation with digital Deepak. So what else was there on that webinar maybe you want to share with others in terms of taking the long game that you referred to, or maybe another lesson that you want to share with others?
Yeah, I think Deepak's he's an interesting guy. Obviously, he was a doctor initially, endocrinology, was the chief of staff at the New England Medical Hospital. And then he sort of realized, hey, we're just medicating people rather than actually helping them, big picture. And especially since so many diseases or ailments or conditions like diabetes or depression are not because of a gene, they're more lifestyle related. So much, and I'm sure you see that day to day in your job, right? So much of what we do is lifestyle related. So I think he's been on the journey to figure out, if we realize that 95% of the bad ailments that we go through are lifestyle related, then actually how do we fix those issues? And it's actually easier to fix if you don't need to give people a $5,000 drug or do other invasive treatments. And so I think where he's gotten to now in his latest book, we were talking about that, his 91st book called Total Meditation. And so I think he's gotten to the point, similar to what you talk about in flow, and maybe he copied the idea from you, is just...
Be careful, Ahmed, be careful.
Deepak, if you're listening...
Playing with fire.
is being present, right? Is basically, meditation is not something you do discreetly 5-10 minutes somewhere else, but just approaching everything with that notion of slowing down. And so he had this notion of stop, which is like S for stop, T for take a breath, O for observe, and then P for proceed with patience, or proceed with attention. And so, and I think that's true for sort of applying that mindfulness mindset to all things we do. But then he's also combined that with, a lot of work on science. And think you've had some of this conversation with maybe Anissa on the vagus nerve, and with Mikra, just talking about some of these things where we kind of talk about these things as like, hey, you should meditate or you should do breathing, but like, actually, it's not like a Eastern made up thing. There's like a scientific reason. And I think he's sort of a unique person to combine East and West, because look, I'm not a fan of just doing something because it works. You should do it if it works, but kind of also want to invest some time in figuring out why it works. And that's helpful. And so he talked a lot about the vagus nerve and how to bring joy. And I think he's gotten to the point now where he realizes, and we talked about, how to stop aging, because I saw him physically 5-6 years ago at an event in California. The guy looked younger now, and he looked like literally he'd reversed aging. I was like, what's going on? Like, how are you? You're like 71 years old, but you look like you're 55 years old. So you're like aging in reverse. It's kind of strange. And so I was like, seriously, what's going on? And so other than things like diet, I think where he's gotten to a point is just, he's like, the way not to stop time is to stop thinking about time, is to stop like focusing on like, I got to do this or I got to do that, and stressing and worrying and, scheduling, just be. Stop human doing and just be a human being. And I think you said that, right?
Right. Well, for me, it's the same side of the coin, the being and the doing, because from the being comes the doing. That's where there's, I used to be called a human doing, not a human being. And in the book, I clarified that one cannot exist without the other. So, but he's talking about basically be in the moment, stop living in the past, stop living in the future. He's talking about true presence, right? I mean, that's where he's coming from. And that's easily said, and it can be done, in transient ways, but he's talking about making it a way of life each moment at a time, right? Which is possible.
It's positive, and I think I get stuck in that process all the time, and it's a daily reminder, hey, you're feeling envy, you're feeling anger, you're feeling jealousy. Hey, like, firstly, you're creating a story. Secondly, like, be in the present, like what's actually happening, what's the real origin for why you're feeling this way. Go sit with that real emotion, and then you overcome it, and then you move on. But
But are we teaching that to our children?
yeah, so I'd love your advice on this. I mean, we've tried a little bit of meditation with them. The other thing we try is sort of like at the end of the day, sit down and talk about, what's the best thing that happened to you? What's the worst thing that happened to you? Or how did you feel? And just talk about feeling more. And if they want to cry about something, hey, it's okay to cry, let it out. Let's discuss why you're feeling this way. I think at least when I grew up, it was like not okay to cry and it was not okay to talk about feelings and emotions. So I think what at least I found is just asking them more about how you're feeling as opposed to how you're doing, which is different. Or what are you feeling, which is different from how was the test. The test was hard, but how did you feel about the test? Or how are you feeling today? So it's just, and it's important to have that early conversation. Otherwise, people don't even develop the alphabet to have that conversation.
That's the thing, right? Originally, Harvard did the study and said the family that eats together stays together. And with Dr. Siddiqui, I remember having the conversation, and he said it's actually the family that chooses together. And chew is the dialogue you're referring to. It's the dialogue, it's the conversation that you have over the meal, and as a result, you make choices. And you're right. I mean, there's no right and wrong, but yeah, the preference is to ask, how are you feeling? Like even when the kids get their exam results, like right now, my son just did his 5 sets of IB mocks. And I said, if you look at my messages, how did it feel? Or how did it flow? Right? And then he will express how he's feeling. And from that space, it's like, okay, if you want to go further, is how would you choose differently?
Yeah.
Right. But I think asking that question every, at dinner, but also you sharing, right, at the same time. So that gives them, some people need permission, right, and showing and leading by example. And that was the idea of writing the book, right, to show and that we were not raised with vulnerability, but it's okay. And many of us feel these things, but we just never share them. And now it's in writing, right? So it's kind of like, okay, if he's crazy enough to do it in writing, maybe we can talk about it, right? I don't know if it's working, but at least that was one of the reasons of doing it. So,
well, it worked for me. That's how you and I met each other, and it's been a helpful book, and I've reread it a few times, and I showed you my autographed copy with a inscription and my notes. So yeah, it's been well read, and thank you for writing.
No, thank you. I'm glad that your wife is still tolerating you after you put some of those things into action, because that's the risky part, right?
Yeah.
But right. So if we look at let's take lessons learned from maybe your parents, right? We didn't talk about your parents, which we all know are an integral part of your who you are today and how you turned out. I'm talking about the good side, right? No, just kidding. But so there's many parents and many grandparents on the call. What would you share from that perspective?
I mean, look, I had a good childhood. It wasn't like an overly communicative childhood. Growing up, my father was a pilot. He used to fly around. I didn't used to see him that often. So I would say for 18 years, I didn't see him that often until I went to university, and then I was in the US for a while. So I spent a lot more time with my grandmother, who lived with us, and my mother. And so obviously she was busy because she was being basically a single mom for it. So it was a household in which you were taught to work hard, get good grades, classic immigrant lifestyle. Get out of the ditch, make something of yourself. My dad was a big reader, so I learned from him, which is why I have a lot of books. Hopefully I've read some of them. Yeah, I guess I learned curiosity and that the world was a big place, and that I should go see some of it and make something of myself.
Some of that being now handed down to the kids, or it's obviously not the non-communicative part, which obviously we see you put into action. But on the curiosity side, I mean, kids are curious anyway, but how are you going to bring that and instill that by leading by example as you are in terms of reading and training, or is there more than that?
So, if you, as you and I kind of look at our lives and we're like, okay, I think in the end, I've kind of gotten to a good place and I feel happy with myself. So you're like, well, maybe I should just give the kids the same upbringing that I've had because, hey, if I kind of got to a happy place, I guess what I'm saying is if you, as you become more successful, you feel like I can protect them more, coddle them more, send them to better schools, give them more money, give them more toys, have less suffering than you had. But then you're like, but wait, I thought you kind of need some of that bad stuff to make them who they are. And so, you have to kind of figure out how to do that balance. And so we get stuck. We have to constantly ask the question of, are we pushing them hard enough? But are we also making them more emotionally balanced or better emotionally than we were? Some people would argue that, if people don't have a chip on their shoulder and they feel too comfortable and life was too good, then actually won't work hard because they're like, so, and I have that constant debate. I guess my wife is more of a tiger mother and I'm more of a softy dad. And so, so it's good that we are balanced like that. But I don't have any strong answers other than it's a constant struggle. And I try to read a book about, parenting and being a better parent. A lot of good books on that subject, like Esther Wojcicki, How to Raise Successful People is an interesting book. But I think I think it all boils down to treating kids with respect and treating them, instilling kindness and hunger and curiosity in them, and then kind of, providing them a forum for when they can learn, but not pushing them, and also realizing that they have multiple intelligences and their own geniuses. And so your job is just to be sort of what is a parent, or what is the definition of a parent? You're sort of a caretaker, you're a caregiver. When they fall, you're supposed to pick them up, but I don't think you're supposed to make a lot of decisions for them. You're supposed to just kind of educate them and give them the guardrails. So I try not to be too overbearing on them, and it's easy to be, right? Because you're like, well, actually, I know better. And I've seen this, and I can give you all of these things, and I can make the world better for you. But if you provide too much, then you can remove all their own drive and hunger and curiosity. So
yeah, it's the difference between creating a crutch and empowering, right? And you're trying to find that balance. I mean, you use the word struggle. I would choose differently and just say, we're all challenged at different levels. Struggle, it makes it a mountain climbing exercise, which I don't think you want to do for the rest of your life, right, Ahmed?
Exactly. I kind of, whenever they come to me, hey, Daddy, can you help me with this? I'm like, take 1 minute. I know you can figure it out. And 1 minute later, they do figure it out. So it's fine. And I hope that builds confidence and they feel more empowered that way.
Yeah, you're showing the confidence you have in them in order to get it done. And as long as you're calm and centered, automatically they, I used to experience that where one of my sons would wait till I get home to do his homework, and all I would do is sit next to him and say nothing, do nothing, and the homework would be done in 10, 15 minutes, which is exactly what you're referring to, right? That they know they're safe, they know they're trusted, they know that you believe in them, you're proud of them, and then things will flow.
That's it.
Right? But finding that balance. So we've got another five minutes to go. Any other areas of lessons that you want to talk about? Anything that any questions? I mean, we've had only one person ask a question. Please, anyone, if there's any questions, we have 5 more minutes. But for me, I mean, just to get to that space. I mean, you're now in the UK. You're seeing how things are being managed. You're saying that we're now living very short-term thinking, and we've lost that whole long game perspective, right? Obviously, I think it's just noisy. Maybe it's just the noise. But at the same time, when I speak to people like Peter Vogel, Philip Markovici, and Roger King, I hear a lot of families taking a lot of major decisions because they have the time, right? And of course, a lot of the issues that were there have come up and been inflated, you can say, or pronounced. So are you seeing that as well? Or are you seeing people more on the sidelines saying, let's wait and see, let's pray this kind of just blows away? Because you're meeting with hundreds of these families, right?
Yeah, so I think, and so you could answer that question in many domains, right? Sort of what are they doing with their finances? What are they doing as a family and their purpose? So what are they doing in the operational business? So what are the, and I think, again, Deepak kind of talked about this in the sense of, if usually when crises like these happen, like 1918, we came out and we had the roaring 20s. And so you have to sort of think about, as you guys have done with these webinar series, for example, what's great about what's happening? How can I learn from this? How can I come out better? I don't know if everyone's asking that question. Some people are just in like, we got to survive this. And I understand things are quite hard for a lot of people and you do have to survive it to come out on the other side. But I think plenty of people are asking the question of, how can I make my business better? For example, a retailer that did 90% of his business, high-end retailer, sort of like the Tiffany's of Africa, did 90% of his business through their physical stores in Chelsea, now sort of restructuring and saying, hey, actually our online business has grown 6x, 7x, and this would have never happened because we always have the physical business as a crutch. So a lot of people are realizing this is a great opportunity for me to restructure and change ourselves and come out. But you have to have the courage and then give yourself permission to try and make a mistake. And I think, but it's important that we do that. These are the opportunities that you come out. And I think when I think back at my life, and again, as this probably, I'm paraphrasing a David Brooks quote, which is, when we think back at our lives of the things that really formed us and made us who we are, it wasn't like the happy moments. It was like the bad stuff. That, when the bad stuff happened, we hit a wall, we fell into the ditch, but we came out and that really formed us and made us stronger. And so we should all wish, even as hard as it is, for bad things to happen to us, not to other people. And that will make us better in the long run because we'll learn and adapt and get stronger and build confidence. You do that repeatedly and you end up being a much stronger individual than when you started. So yeah, it's happening.
For most people, COVID is beyond what they could have ever imagined, right? It's
and we have the luxury of being able to speak about it positively. I think a lot of people obviously are going through much worse.
Yeah. All right, Ahmed, we've got 2 more minutes to go. Some last closing remarks. I know I'm pushing and probing, but I think you're well equipped to respond. In the beginning, we joked, right? You said I have my script, so I can be in flow, and maybe wanna take that as a last remark. And I said, if you give me a script, you're gonna throw me out of flow.
Look, thank you for doing what you're doing, buddy. I've learned a lot from being around you in the last 2 years and all the different guests you guys have had. So keep it going. I love the value creation you're doing. As you know, I've shared what you guys are doing with everybody in my world. I think it's amazing. Every single session you have done has been great. I've listened to some of them twice. I find it super useful. So please, thank you.
No, thank you. I hope the people I know are finding it valuable. Thank you for your sharing. I will, if it's okay with you, the people who registered and the people who watched, would it be give permission to send your a few things so that they can subscribe to your weekly newsletter? Do I have your permission? Okay, so we'll do that. And again, Ahmed, thank you very much. Really, thank you. Bon appetit for the lunch you're about to have. I'm sure it's now 1 o'clock your time. And basically next week we have an advisor who's going to talk about, shaping, basically having life shape you or you shaping life. And the week after we're going to have Roger King coming back. Haven't decided on the topic yet, but we'll send you an email this weekend. All right. So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you again, Ahmed. Truly an honor and privilege. Thank you. And we'll see you online and of course, chat personally whenever it happens. Okay. Thanks a lot. Thank you, everyone. See you next week.